Welcome to The Explainer. So today, we're diving into a single, really shocking phrase that has totally rocked Israel, raising huge questions about its future. Super Sparta. Is this some kind of vision for ultimate strength, or is it actually a blueprint for total ruin? Let's break it down.
Okay, so this is where it all began. On September 15, 2025, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu dropped this absolute bombshell of a statement. We will have to become a super Sparta. And look, this wasn't some off-the-cuff remark. This was a declaration that sent shockwaves and alarm bells ringing all across the country, and honestly, around the world.
So, what on earth did Netanyahu actually mean by that? Let's get into his super Sparta vision. At its very core, it's a plan for a state that is completely self-sufficient, heavily militarized, and really intentionally isolated from the rest of the world. To really get our heads around this, we need to understand both the history he's referencing and the economic idea behind it all.
At the heart of this entire plan is one key concept: autarky. Basically, it's an economic system built on total self-sufficiency with extremely limited trade. The whole point is for a country to be completely independent, to not need any international trade or outside help to function. Imagine a nation literally pulling up the drawbridge and cutting itself off from everyone else.
So you have to ask, why propose something so incredibly radical? Well, in his speech, Netanyahu laid out his reasoning pretty clearly. He argued that Israel is facing this growing wave of international isolation. But, and this is key, he didn't blame Israel's own policies. Nope, he pointed the finger at outside forces, the influence of Muslim immigrants on politics in Europe, and what he described as a global media siege being led by Qatar and China. And his solution to all this? Israel has to become totally self-sufficient, and it needs to start with its defense industries.
But you know, a vision like this doesn't just pop up out of thin air. It's a direct reaction to a political storm that's been brewing for years. Let's take a look at how a warning from the past, one that was once laughed at, has suddenly become a very real and very dangerous present. This timeline just lays out the dramatic reversal perfectly. You go back to 2011, and you've got former Prime Minister Ehud Barak warning that a diplomatic tsunami is coming for Israel. But then, jump to 2017, and Netanyahu is openly mocking him, asking, "Where is the tsunami?" All while bragging about how great Israel's diplomatic relationships were. Now, fast forward to 2025, and guess what? Facing that exact tsunami, it's Netanyahu himself is proposing this drastic Super Sparta plan. I mean, that is a complete 180.
And this diplomatic pressure, it's not just talk anymore. It's starting to have real economic teeth. We're now seeing Europe, which is Israel's single biggest trading partner, seriously considering a partial suspension of its partnership agreement. And they're doing it as a direct response to the ongoing conflict in Gaza. This is where political isolation starts to hit the wallet, and it hits hard.
So this all brings us to probably the most fundamental question in this whole thing. It's a bold idea for sure, but is it even possible? Can Israel's modern, high-tech, deeply globalized economy actually survive all by itself?
To figure that out, we have to push aside all the political speeches and just look at the cold, hard numbers, the facts that show just how connected Israel's economy is to the rest of the world. The reality is, Israel depends on the outside world for the most basic things you can imagine. We're talking about almost all of its oil and coal for energy. We're talking about key foods like wheat, rice, and feed for animals. And we're talking about essential raw materials, steel, aluminum, copper, and literally countless other parts that are needed for everything from factories to its own defense systems. Cutting those off wouldn't just be a problem, it would be catastrophic.
And hey, it's not just about what Israel brings in. So much of its economic success story is about what it sells to the world. Exports, goods and services, make up almost a third of the country's entire GDP. Think about it. That whole startup nation idea, the high-tech and defense sectors they're so famous for, they exist because they sell to a global market. A self-sufficient Sparta doesn't have a startup nation.
Okay, so the economics look, well, pretty much impossible. But let's move beyond the numbers for a second. What about the historical model itself? Is Sparta even a good role model? If you ask historians, they'll tell you that Netanyahu's choice of Sparta is, to put it mildly, deeply flawed.
This is where the popular heroic image of Sparta just completely falls apart when you look at the actual history. The myth, that they were invincible military geniuses. The reality, they lost almost as many important battles as they won. We think of them as defenders of freedom, right? Well, in reality, Sparta was a brutal slave state where only about 15% of the people were actual citizens. And that myth of resilience? The real story is that Sparta eventually collapsed and just faded into history.
This quote from historian Brett Devereaux just hits so hard. He writes, "Sparta was a prison disguised as a state. It added little to the sum of human experience but suffering." So far from being a model to look up to, historians see ancient Sparta as a cautionary tale, a warning about oppression, about a society that closes itself off, and about ultimate failure. Okay, so you've got shaky economics and a really dark historical model. So how did this vision of a new super Sparta go over with the people who would actually have to live there? Well, the reaction inside Israel was, let's just say, swift. And it was loud.
First, the money. The financial markets, which basically run on confidence, they panicked. Instantly. Within just hours of Netanyahu's speech, the Israeli stock market took a nosedive. This wasn't some minor dip. This was a loud and clear signal of deep fear and a total lack of confidence from investors about where the country was heading.
And it wasn't just nervous investors. Israel's own business leaders, the people running the economy, issued this incredibly powerful public statement. The Israeli Business Forum, which represents 200 of the nation's top companies, said it flat out, "We are not Sparta. The vision presented will make it difficult for us to survive in today's developing and globalized world."
But they didn't just criticize the super Sparta idea. No, they laid out a completely different path forward. They demanded the government urgently end the war, secure the release of all hostages, create an official commission to investigate what went wrong, and, this is the big one, set a date for early elections. This was a total rejection of Netanyahu's vision and a clear call for a change in leadership.
And all of this leaves us with one final, powerful question. It was posed by David Rosenberg, who's a leading economic editor at the Haaretz newspaper. He draws the parallel all the way to its conclusion. He says, look, Sparta achieved dominance, but then it overextended itself, it got bogged down, it exhausted its resources, and in the end, it just faded from the pages of history. And then he asks, turning that history lesson into a chilling warning for today, is this the fate we want for ourselves? That's a question that now just hangs over Israel's entire future.